Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro. It's time to review Licorice Pizza. This is the newest film from Paul Thomas Anderson, a filmmaker who we very much admire. You know, like any film kids, like any film bros, he is one of our favorite filmmakers. It's been really interesting to watch Paul Thomas Anderson's trajectory. His films have seemed much less plot heavy recently, and this film felt very much like a Richard Linklater hangout movie. While I'm not the biggest fan of Inherent Vice, it did remind me of like this hazy, dreamlike quality that film had. And I think a lot of that's due to the cinematography. Paul Thomas Anderson gets so much out of his film stock by having this like deep contrast. And there's always this like beautiful like side or backlighting to his characters. And I also thought this came through the sound mixing. The use of like underscore felt very hypnotic. And around like halfway through this film, I really felt like I was kind of floating from one scene to the next. I was kind of in like a timeless state of just like enjoying the movie and just being kind of enveloped in what was happening. As much as we could say that this is like Inherent Vice meets Punch Drunk Love or like meets Boogie Nights or something, every PTA film really has an identity of its own, and this one's absolutely no different. There is a meandering quality to it that did remind me, like you said, of Linklater films, sort of like Everybody Wants Some or Boyhood even. And I think that is going to be where people are most divided on this. And I actually have seen this film twice, and the first time I knew that it was meandering for a purpose, but I had a hard time always seeing that purpose in those moments. But the second time I did feel like there was a really strong overall vision. And yes, meandering is part of the point. It's also PTA's most overtly romantic movie since Punch Drunk Love.
You didn't think Phantom Thread was romantic?
I said overtly. And in a way, I do see shades of Phantom Thread here. And so to me, what's special about this film is one, that it's very insightful about relationships. And in a similar way, it's insightful about sort of the ways that we navigate life, what we're drawn to and where we think we should be going. To me, this is like PTA's ode to the present, to the moment. And it's kind of interesting that the entire thing takes place in the 70s, in a moment that had already passed, and it features all these fleeting trends like the waterbeds, which was like the new revolution at the time that our protagonist hops on. But us watching it, we know that this was the most fleeting, kind of ridiculous trend. But it's about how in that moment, it was something like very special. So the movie is kind of built from pieces like this that seem diverting at first or just seem kind of quirky and strange, but when you put them together, maybe there's something to it.
I felt like it wanted me to watch it very much on the surface and just enjoy what was happening and be very immersed in the moment. Like, it felt like I could walk around and like touch and look and smell everything. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna just enjoy the movie for what it is right now, and I'll think about it later. And then I started to see, especially during like the third act, more of these themes like coming together. Even though this is such a diverting and fun movie to watch, there are so many pieces that we're supposed to play with when it's over. And I think a lot of that comes with this juxtaposition of this intensely sugary and sweet orchard where Gary, the protagonist, is just going around and like picking fruits, savoring each bite. And then, you know, on the peripheral with this older character, she starts to see a serpent in this garden. It's something that might pull you away from these treats. And I also felt like, you know, the age gap of 15 to 25, it made a lot of sense in terms of the themes it's exploring. Like, you get the world of a 15-year-old and you get the world of a 25-year-old, and you sort of like contrast them, and then you see like where the 25-year-old finds that naivete of the 15-year-old charming. You know, this whole film to me, in a more abstract sense, is sort of about that rosy picture that is shaped when you look back into the past. And I do think there's a little bit of cultural context here that's brought up with like the oil shock and that crisis of an America that existed. And there's a whole question of like, did it really exist? Was this an image or a painting of something that was there? Or did this thing like actually fully tactilely exist?
I did really love the look of this movie. The way that every color just pops right out of that frame. Such a vibrant looking movie. And even the characters' faces are just always glowing. And a lot of times they use very warm light on them so that they can become more saturated and like burn into the frame. I love the way that the light refracts off the frame too.
And as always, Paul Thomas Anderson's close-ups are so magnetic. It used film to a more impactful end than maybe any film I've seen, if I think about it, or like as much as any film I've ever seen do it. It is one of the few movies that actually made me say like, man, they don't make films like these anymore. And I hate when people say that, but I was saying that to myself during this film, where there's just not really like this strong plot going through the story, and yet you're engaged and immersed throughout. because of how fucking well made it is.
There were moments maybe in the middle where I did feel myself get a little bit disengaged, but as the movie went on into the second half, some weightier moments do occur that I think were needed, because you can't really quite meander forever. The more I got out of those, the more I was able to look back on the moments where I was maybe not fully engaged or saying, where's this going? And sort of understand those better. Especially those scenes with Sean Penn, Tom Waits, and then the scene with Bradley Cooper. There are going to be people saying like, what is this? Where am I in this movie? And part of the answer to that is that the characters just end up in these random places and shit happens to them, and it's not necessarily for a reason. Paul Thomas Anderson does try to make those moments fun and interesting, but something I did notice was that in some way those characters' larger than life personalities and their showmanship was kind of reflected in the protagonist. And that felt very LA for people to be like that. And maybe Paul Thomas Anderson is so immersed in LA that he doesn't even realize that, but that type of personality is very, very LA.
It's the whole thing of playing a character and playing a role like wherever you are and being like convinced that you are that.
And in some ways, the movie is like a little bit like ignorant to the world around it, but it's also kind of the movie to be that way.
And it knows that it is. Yeah. I think it knows that it is.
Cooper Hoffman, Alana Haim, both excellent in this movie. They both felt very comfortable in these roles. With Cooper Hoffman, I totally bought that character's personality. He balances this line of being this sort of showman, and yet he feels very authentic in being that guy.
And also very unpretentious. And then Alana Haim was able to hit like a lot of different notes. Sometimes she felt like this very sweet and innocent LA girl, and other times she was very fierce, but it all made a lot of sense.
Alana Haim in particular really just eats up these close-ups.
The fact that these are people we haven't seen on screen before, it gave the movie this like purity and this innocence about it. I really want to call out Harriet Sansom Harris, who's only in the film for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, but the one scene she is in, she absolutely ate it and made me like laugh out loud. I want, a spin-off with this character. I want more of it.
Also, Skylar Gisondo was very good in this. Like many are saying, Bradley Cooper was excellent in his like 7 or 8 minutes of screen time. Sean Penn's very good and weird as well. Tom Waits is good. There's a lot of good, very small performances and cameos. Also, Joseph Cross and Benny Safdie are really good in one scene at the end of the movie.
I also really loved seeing a film during the 70s that was very nostalgic for the time period, that didn't just like hit you over the head with 70s hits. A lot of the music choices, like I couldn't tell if they were score or just instrumental music from the period, but it felt like it blended into the unique tone that the movie wanted to set. And it didn't use the jukebox as a crutch for like, oh, this is just a 70s movie. It has to feel like a 70s movie.
And I really like Johnny Greenwood's contributions too here. His score definitely has some sweeter moments with the strings, but there's also like some percussion that gives certain scenes like a nice offbeat momentum.
I can definitely see some people being like, I didn't know what that movie was going for, or I feel like maybe there was something I was missing.
And it's not like it's going to tell you what it's trying to say through actors delivering like tearful monologues or anything. It's not very overt in what it's going for. But it is funny, and there are a lot of like light, sweet moments that I think most people will be able to enjoy the movie at least a little bit.
But I actually had a little bit different reaction than I thought, where some people were saying they were just smiling and laughing throughout, and they had a giant smile on their face at the end of the film. I was a little teary at the end because I felt like there was, a sort of like bittersweetness about it. And I felt like it was very, deep and poignant. Like, it didn't come across as this like relentlessly cheery thing, and that's why I liked it.
So in terms of Oscars, I think this is definitely going to get at least nominated for Best Picture. With the 4.3 on Letterboxd and like a 90 on Metacritic, this movie is just capturing all film people's hearts.
And it's a movie that if you love it, you really love it. So I do not see how this could miss a Best Picture nomination.
I think its biggest struggle with winning is, like we were saying, it's a little meandering, and some people are going to have a tough time sort of understanding what every scene is going for, and they might feel a little lost in it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know how wide the net is that it's casting, but there's a certain kind of fish that it will capture absolutely, and it will have them in its grip very tightly. Like, for example, I think the Critics' Choice are going to eat this movie up. I'm going to be predicting this to win the Critics' Choice Award.
I think there's a path for it to win Best Picture. And also we can see Paul Thomas Anderson winning a screenplay Oscar. Again, if Belfast is not winning, I think PTA takes the screenplay Oscar. And The more I think about it, is Belfast really gonna like hold on to the front runner status like the whole year? That's
Whoa.
maybe
Really
not.
speculating out there. Although it's weird because it's so meandering and kind of plotless.
You don't really see the writing
Yeah.
that much either.
I think that's obvious. That for me, that's an example of very strong writing, but it's not, structured in that traditional way.
it's also just a way to award like PTA finally, So I don't even think it needs to be the most screenplay-y movie. In the case that it is a Best Picture winner, though, would PTA be in consideration for winning director?
Yeah.
I think that's maybe, but maybe it could do even just a spotlight and go screenplay picture and they split everything else. Alana Haim could get in if the movie has a really good day. I really liked her in the movie, but there's nothing about the performance that makes me think like, oh, she's just in. And Bradley Cooper in supporting, like, I guess he could do a sort of Sam Rockwell in Vice, like just get in because sort of thing. But that performance was very short. You don't need an Oscar nomination for that, Bradley Cooper. Like, I loved you in this little bit, but that's like a best cameo.
I think it's a little bit silly that he would be nominated for something like this, but what I really think is quite silly is people saying that he's gonna win just because he needs an Oscar.
I don't think the movie's editing screamed like this is the type of thing that the Oscars go for. If it got in for editing, it would show that it's just massive, like a top 2 movie.
Yeah, editing would be like support for the movie as a whole.
Because it does favor those longer takes. If this is going to win Best Picture, it'll also be important to see it get at least one SAG nomination. Nothing's won Best Picture without at least one SAG nom. If it got Ensemble, that would be a very good sign. It would have to get DGA probably. You'd want to see it generally just show that it's like a top 5 type thing at all the major awards. So there's a path to Best Picture. I guess the obstacles are maybe the nomination haul isn't guaranteed to be too high and the win haul as well.
Yeah, there's signs that I would look for, like you kind of laid out all of them. And if it hits all of these or most of them, then I would say, okay, it might steal Best Picture at the end of the day.
Like how Parasite seemed unlikely, but it hit the SAG Ensemble. It secured an editing nomination, like those kind of things.
I think this is a masterpiece. It is one of the best of the year. Give it a 10 out of 10.
I don't know if I'm eager on calling this a masterpiece. It is one of the best of the year. I've been very reserved on the 10s I'm giving this year, so I think I'm not quite gonna go for that. We're gonna give it a 9. It could grow on me as a 10 over time, though. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
What do you like on your pizza?